The first sentence of Ocean Vuong's newest novel is this: "The hardest thing in the world is to live only once." Now, I love first sentences, and this one kind of floated off the page and stuck with me ever since I first read it. And it resonated especially when I thought of this evening and being in this room with all of you. Like many of you, over the last 4 months, I've been voraciously reading the 27 books by the 28 authors presenting this weekend. Within the pages of those books, my life experiences were vast. I went to prison. I was a child actor who had an affair with my mom's friend. I was Jackie Kennedy. I walked the streets of Amsterdam with Anne Frank before she wrote a word in her diary. I took a deeper look at a horrific crime in a barn in Mississippi. I grieved my husband. I lost my mother. I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I learned how to call in, how to craft my authentic life and career, and how to eat really well in Boston. I searched for some good dirt, the black in blues, and the stories left behind. I tried being nice. I went to war. I took a peek at some cleavage. I was an Indian genius. I was an emperor of gladness. Yes, the hardest thing in the world is to live only once. But how lucky for us as readers to discover and live so many lives. Welcome to the Nantucket Book Festival, presented by the Nantucket Book Foundation. My name is Tim Ehrenberg, and I am the proud president of the Nantucket Book Foundation. This is my favorite weekend of the year. You know, Nantucket gets the reputation for being quite an exclusive island, and it is. We are 30 miles out to sea, but we try to make the Nantucket Book Festival as inclusive as possible, starting with, I believe there are 35 individual events this weekend, and 34 of them are completely free and open to all. Our work is not done just after this weekend, though. We work year-round with our students, with our Visiting Author in Schools program, as well as our Young Writer Award and Theron Dunn Scholarship, which we will present at the Dreamland tomorrow evening. But we're still not done. We do an annual summer fundraiser where we bring an Ellen Hildebrand novel to life, a children's book day in late summer, and our support of the Nantucket Bookmobile. All of these literary initiatives are only possible through the private donations made by you and everyone in our program. If you are moved by any person or any word you read this weekend, please consider a donation by going to nantucketbookfoundation.org. And our QR code is right here on the front of the program, and it would mean so much to us. I want to say a special thank you to our top sponsors, the White Elephant and the Boston Globe. As well as our top donors, Mary and Robert Haft, Richie Battle, Elizabeth Galvin, Nancy Seaman, and Alan Schwartz. And truly, every single one of you has given to our cause. Your support is the very ink that writes our next chapter, and I always like to say that it may just inspire the next generation to become your next favorite writer who will present at the Nantucket Book Festival. Speaking of writers, where are all my writers this year? Oh, this lineup is one for the books. You made it. Nantucket is not easy to get to. I've lived here for 13 years, and I think my travel itinerary never worked out quite as planned, but we like to think that once you make it here, it's worth it. The number one question I get asked is, how do you decide who to bring each year to the festival? And that answer is simple. It's so organic. It means someone came, whether it's the literary committee or a friend of our festival, and said, I just read this book. It moved me so much. We must invite them to speak. There is such a genuine passion for each and every one of your books in this room and throughout this weekend, and I'm just so thankful that you made the trip and are here. So thank you. This lineup is one for the books. I can't tell you how many people stopped me on the streets of Nantucket. A couple of you hanging out your windows, driving to say, I can't believe you have so-and-so. It's truly spectacular. To the Nantucket Book Foundation Board of Directors, Executive Committee, Advisory Council, and the Nantucket Book Festival Committee, can I please ask you to stand? And can we give a round of applause? We could not ask for better ambassadors for literature on this island. Thank you so much. I would love to be able to stand up here and thank you all individually. And I know we want to get to our speakers down there, so I will be really quick to just name a few of you. To co-founders Mary Haft, Wendy Hudson, and Megan Blair Valero, our honorary festival chair, Jill Karp, our development assistant, Taylin Brianne, and a very, very special shout out to our one full-time employee, Kaylee Kokomore. Kaylee, thank you for everything you've done to make this weekend a success. Now I would like to introduce the dynamic duo of our 2025 co-chairs, Mary Haft and Sarah DeVello. Sarah is one of those passionate human beings that if she's talking to you about a book or an author, you almost go into a trance and you say, I must go buy book Sarah was talking about. That passion is such a genuine trait of yours, and I love it, and it's so great to have on our team. Mary Haft is who I like to call the beating heart of our organization, because let's face it, we are not much without our beating hearts, and the same thing can be said about the Nantucket Book Foundation. With every detail, your dedication is why we are in this room. And now, please join me in welcoming Mary and Sarah.
Hello, Nantucket. So I got involved in the festival because our fearless executive director, Kaylee Kokomore, picked me up in a bar. Yeah. So that's not exactly the full extent of the story, but I write mysteries, so I gotta compress the details and keep the pace moving. And if a little gets lost in translation, that's okay with me. The full story is that I went to Authors and Bars 4 years ago by myself, and I stood outside the Nantucket Hotel Breeze Bar, hyperventilating and trying desperately to gather the courage to walk into a bar by myself. And when I finally gathered the courage to walk in, there was Kaylee with her warmth and her kindness and her elegance and her clarity and her warm smile, and she welcomed me, and we fell into conversation about books and reading and authors and this festival. And as many of you in this room know, that is the little-known sixth love language. It's like acts of service, physical affection, and books. And if it isn't, well, it should be. So as we were talking, little did I know that Kaylee, in the tradition of all of the great fishermen of this island over the millennia that it has existed, was dangling the bait and reeling me in. And I didn't even know what was happening until I was in the festival boat and Captain Kaylee was going for shore at full speed ahead. And later, when I realized that I had, in fact, been reeled in by Captain Kaylee, I was actually more than okay with this, because books have saved my life. I grew up in a family that could not afford books. Books were luxury items. And every 2 weeks, we would go to the library and we would fill our grocery bags with books, and I would go home and read them. And through those pages, I learned that the way forward was education, and I needed to get one of those. And so now, it is the honor and the work of my lifetime to be able to provide books to others and to serve as a connector, as an amplifier, and as a pollinator in the world of books, to amplify the work of my fellow authors, to provide books for kids, which we do with the bookmobile, with the free books that we give out in English and in Spanish at our annual Children's Book Day, with our scholarships, with our Young Writer programs. This is work that I deeply believe in. Books were and remain for me the roadmap forward, guiding us through paths that we have yet to traverse ourselves, and mountains that we have yet to surmount, or dark times that we have yet to face. But others before us have, and they have left us these guides, they have given us these roadmaps. And these books are are a lighthouse in the parlance of this island, guiding us home and guiding us forward to shores that we have not yet visited. As an author and in my role here to be able to bring stories to the page and books to readers and to be able to amplify my fellow writers and shine a work on the incredible 28 authors and 27 books that we celebrate this year, to be able to preserve and protect stories and history at a time when stories and history are under assault is an honor and a privilege. And by joining us here tonight, you are adding your voice to this chorus. Together we gather in bookish community. You have come from near and far, and together we raise our voices in an unstoppable support. We are here, we know the way forward, and we will march shoulder to shoulder, becoming threads in the tapestry as old as time that is storytelling. So thank you for being here with your presence. Thank you for adding to our light. And we are so, so happy to have you. Bravo.
You can see why we're so deeply happy that Sarah is ours. And really, Kaylee, what would we do? This event wouldn't happen. Our festival would not happen if it wasn't for our singular, exceptional executive director, Kaylee Kokomore. And then, honestly, as I think you just got a little wind of our impresario, Tim Ehrenberg. Tim talks books. We're the luckiest organization on earth because we actually have our own Nantucket Book Worm. And do follow Tim Talks Books, and really he's become a book influencer, and he is so hugely influential to our organization and truly to each of us individually and personally. So Tim Ehrenberg, you get a round of applause. To read widely is to become more of who we hope to be, more of who we dream to be. This is not a time to lose heart. This is a time to find our hearts. We are warriors for writers. Our passionate belief in the power of words to change worlds, and it is through the prism of a book that we can learn to unclench our hearts, to be open to a different perspective, a multi-dimensional view. It's a prism we would not have known otherwise, but for the pages of these books. Writer Adam Ross, who is with us this weekend, said, "There's no metric to measure what happens when people gather like this and decide to change their lives, the world. This is how the culture doesn't fly apart from the center. We can all be held in this moment and in this community, and to be reminded we belong to each other." Thank you so much for being with us on this wonderful night.
Thank you, Mary and Sarah, for your words and for everything you do for our Nantucket Book Foundation. We bring ourselves to books. Every one of us has a different experience, even if we read the same story, by bringing our own past, personality, and circumstances to it. I urge you to bring yourselves to this weekend. Open your minds and hearts. Laugh like you did when you were a little kid, or don't be afraid to shed a tear. Listen, observe, consider. Live in the moment. Get uncomfortable. Think about something in a different way. Allow books to move you and change you, because by reading widely, we'll become more. And that is the theme for tonight's celebration. As our co-founder Mary Haft wrote in our program, every book is a journey, an exploration of an idea, of a history, of people, of possibilities. Reading widely, seeking voices from different genres, perspectives, and worlds not traveled expands the envelope of what it means to be human. The four writers who I'm about to introduce tonight reflect the power of words to engage and expand the universe of our own humanity through the transcendent power of reading, becoming more. Our first speaker is Patrick Radin Keefe. Do you all know the term auto-buy author? It's this idea that whatever the author is putting out on the shelf, you're going to pick it up and buy it and read it. And Patrick Radin Keefe is one of mine. He is a staff writer at The New Yorker and the author of the New York Times bestsellers Rogues, Empire of Pain, and Say Nothing, a true story of murder and memory in Northern Ireland, which received the National Book Critics Circle Award for Nonfiction, was selected as one of the top 10 books of 2019 by the New York Times Book Review, the Washington Post, the Chicago Tribune, and the Wall Street Journal, and was named one of the 10 best nonfiction books of the decade by Entertainment Weekly. His previous books are The Snakehead and Chatter. His work has been recognized with the Guggenheim Fellowship, the National Magazine Award for Feature Writing, and the Orwell Prize for Political Writing. He's also the creator and host of the 8-part podcast, Wind of Change. Please welcome Patrick Radin Keefe.
I hadn't realized that I was going first. Fortunately, I am notoriously an easy act to follow. I actually just got here from New York, and I will keep this brief and pretty extemporaneous, but it's wonderful to be with you. I grew up in Boston and used to come occasionally to Nantucket as a kid, so it's terrific to be back here on this island, and I have my own kids in the room tonight, so great to bring them here with me. So if you know Boston, I grew up in Dorchester in a big house that was, thank you, Dorchester in the house? All right. In a big house that was full of books. And probably my earliest memory in life was of my mother reading me a book in bed before I fell asleep. My father would read aloud to us when we were kids. We would lie on the floor and draw, and he would read to us. And so books were just a big, big part of my life. We had a TV, but we weren't really allowed to watch it all that much. And if you remember what life was like as a kid or an adolescent back in those days, and here I'm talking about the 1980s, 1990s, summer days were these like long, unstructured days with not a lot to do, in which you often read a book because that was the only thing to do. And so for me, it was mystery stories. It was the Hardy Boys and Agatha Christie and Arthur Conan Doyle, and that was my whole world. And I think it's interesting to say even as much as I just have, because certainly to my kids and to anyone of a younger generation, and maybe to some of you, it all sounds a little antique, doesn't it? It sounds like I'm describing a world that doesn't really exist anymore, or doesn't exist in the way that it did for me when I was a kid. Books are a very old technology, right? You think back to kind of scrolls, to people writing things on papyrus. My sister is an art historian, and she specializes in medieval illuminated manuscripts, these incredible kind of codexes, these manuscripts that monks would spend thousands of hours creating. And this technology has been with us this whole time, and it's worked pretty well. And yet there are moments these days where it starts to feel a little dated, right? It starts to feel as though we all have these phones in our pocket, which are these incredible creations. The kind of increment of narrative time has like shrunk and shrunk and shrunk to the length of a TikTok video. And I'm sure I cannot be the only one in this room who feels that my own brain is getting rewired practically in real time, that I do not read in the way that I read when I was a kid. And I'm a writer, I write books for a living, right? So this is difficult for me. And yet I look out there at the world right now, and I think in some ways we need books more than we ever have before. In part because, certainly if you read the newspaper or you pay attention to what is happening in the country as we speak, these people don't read books. There are decisions being made by people who I think it would be safe to say have, just the kind of barest relationship to recorded history as those of us who do try and read books understand it. At the same time, if you want an indication of the power of books, the ongoing power of books, think about the fact that book banning is way up. Censorship is way up. The American Library Association in 2024 said it was something like 2,500 books that were either banned or there were efforts to censor them in public libraries, at public schools around this country. And so that, to me, gives you a sense of the continued power of books, right, as a vehicle for ideas. Another reason for me to go back to what I said a moment ago is I feel like my brain is broken, right? For me, the experience, and I have to force myself, but the experience of putting my phone across the room, not doing that like phantom limb thing where you reach for it every 2 minutes, because like heaven forbid you got an email and didn't read it when it came in, and forcing myself to sit there and just become absorbed in a book for 45 minutes or an hour. I swear, I feel my blood pressure kind of come back to normal. I feel as though I'm able to think in a kind of coherent, analytical way that is really hard when you're on a screen and getting bombarded by notifications. I would also say, though, there's a wonderful quote that the late TV critic Roger Ebert had about I guess he was a movie critic and TV, but he once described television as an empathy machine. And I think the books were the original empathy machine. And for me, certainly, and you heard it in some of these wonderful opening remarks, right, that part of what a book can do is take you out of your life and put you into someone else's and find some compassion. And so for all of these reasons, particularly that last one, right, the need for us to find humanity and compassion when we look at each other, it feels to me as though books are more important than ever. The last thing I would say, there was a wonderful phrase that Sarah used about bookish community. And I always think that as a writer, one of the paradoxes, right, is that I spend years alone working on these books, and then they go out into the world, and I get to come out and talk to people. And it's this kind of strange thing where you're very, very solitary, and then you have this amazing experience of going out and spending time with people who've spent time reading your book. But similarly, as readers, right, reading is necessarily a pretty isolated, solitary activity. And yet we can also come together in forums like this and talk about books and celebrate books and have a kind of moment of communion. So in that spirit of bookish community, I'm really delighted to be with you all today and looking forward to this weekend. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Our next speaker is Loretta J. Ross, an activist, professor, and public intellectual. In her 5 decades in the human rights movement, she's deprogrammed white supremacists, taught convicted rapists the principles of feminism, and organized the second largest march on Washington, surpassed only by the 2017 Women's March. A co-founder of the National Center for Human Rights Education and the sister song Women of Color Reproductive Justice Collective, her many accolades and honors include a 2022 MacArthur Fellowship and a 2024 induction into the National Women's Hall of Fame. Today, Ross is an associate professor at Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts, and is the founder of La Rasta Consulting, with which she runs Calling In, training sessions online, and organizations around the country. After watching her TED Talk, she's become one of my personal heroes because she stops and she's listening to people. And so I hope we can all live in the moment and listen to her right now. Please, ladies and gentlemen, Loretta J. Ross.
I hope the microphone is working. Okay, well, first of all, I need to say this, Patrick. I disagree. I think they're reading books. Mein Kampf and Atlas Shrugged. It's that those are the only 2 that they're reading. It is such a joy to explore books, because I've always been a bookish girl, but I didn't realize that I didn't come to it naturally. I was 40 years old when I went to a beach and broke out in a rash. And I was telling my mom the story, and I said, my dermatologist said that I'm allergic to the sun. And she said, you didn't know? I was like, no, I knew I always kind of avoided it and played tennis at night and stuff. She said, girl, when I took you out in your baby carriage, you used to get heat stroke. And I'm in southern Texas, right? And she said, that's why you always stayed inside and read while all the other kids were playing outside. I said, I thought I stayed inside and read because I wanted to read. She said, no. You know, only your mama can call you out like that, right? And so I've always been bookish, but I didn't know it was physiologically induced. For me, the whole concept of becoming is, you know, not to sound like Michelle Obama or anybody like that, but it is through books that I discovered all the portals of my life and the lives of millions of people. And my relationship with books is not only as an ingester of them constantly from the minute I could read, so much so that my third grade teacher used to give a star for every book you read. And I came in one week and had had read 5 books, and she thought I was lying. I was like, no, really, this is true. My mother, of course, got on her case for her accusing me of lying. But anyway, and my other relationship with books comes to mind. Mom, I'm one of 8 kids, and Dad was in the military. Mom was mainly a housewife and a domestic worker. But anyway, at 14, I had to volunteer at Brooke General Army Hospital for the Vietnam soldiers coming back who had come back with half their bodies missing. And these boys were only a couple of years older than me. And my job as a candy striper was to roll the library cart around to them and offer them books to read. And they only chose me for that job because I was a book addict. And so books have changed everything for me, both my relationship to being outside in the sun, my relationship to how I am unalterably opposed to war, how I am totally non-denominational, because I can read everything from Zane Grey to, what's something else I could probably read? I don't know. I've never met a book I could throw away. Has anybody else felt like that, that it's just impossible to throw a book away? Some writer said one day, you know, I actually live in a library that just happens to have a kitchen and a bathroom. And that's me, because I have 3 libraries. I have 2 more libraries than I have bathrooms. So that's me. But back to my topic, because this is what I think I should be talking about. Though it is dangerous to give a girl like me free rein. I did not plan on writing a book called Calling In. That was not a plan. And I found that trying not to write the book was like trying to hold in a fart. It just wasn't going to work. But what I felt compelled to write about was how unbelievably mean people were to each other and calling themselves doing good social justice work. And I was like, oh, no, that ain't the way this is supposed to go. You're going to have to, all your radical politics don't matter if you don't have radical love practices to go with them. You're just bullying people with your so-called wokeness. And you ain't nearly as woke as you think you are if you think bullying somebody is the way to do human rights work. And I felt compelled to point out that contradiction to people as a long-time human rights activist and stuff. And so this is the book that I birthed that I hadn't planned on writing, but I'm glad I did. Learning how to call people in instead of calling them out. Also calling myself in, because I swear there are so many people I want to cancel. And the list grows every day. And I'm not talking about just big political figures, you know. I guess I have to keep this not, 501c3. But I should warn you that the course I teach at Smith is called White Supremacy in the Age of Trump. So you kind of know my politics. Matter of fact, he knows my politics. I've been invited to debate Charlie Kirk. What an honor, right? I'm like, I could eat your ass up, boy. Except that I don't debate with fools, you know? But I lost my lead. when I look at the present state of the world, I understand what the fascist movement is doing. That's why I teach about it. What frustrated me was our ineptness in dealing and addressing it. Because all the passion in the world doesn't matter if you're amazingly ineffective with it. And that's what I see the human rights movement doing and being right now. And so I'm going to shut up because I have gone on too long. But in my book, I want you to notice something that I think is probably the most important part. We have all heard about emotional intelligence, self-regulation, and identifying that. But in my book, I coined a term called integrity intelligence. How do you stay in right relationship with your values? How do you learn to say what you mean and mean what you say, but choose not to say it mean? Because you don't want to hurt somebody just because you are having a disagreement with them. This type of intelligence should be taught to us as children, but someone has mistaken morality from religiosity instead of character development. And so my book on calling in is really a book on integrity intelligence and what we must use in order to beat back the authoritarianism that is sweeping all of our democratic values away. And so I couldn't be more passionate about it, but I swear, I hadn't planned on writing that book. As a matter of fact, I'll close with this. As proof, the book I had planned on writing, called Abortion and Reproductive Justice, comes out in September. Thank y'all.
Thank you, Loretta. I enjoyed every moment of that. I'm not kidding when I say Bob Woodward is a connector, but it may not be how you think. The amount of high school classmates, poli-sci classmates, that have reached out to me on social media to say, you have Bob Woodward at your you're going to meet Bob Woodward? I'm like, you've had 5 children, we haven't spoken in 25 years, and Bob Woodward is where we're picking back up? Bob is the author of 3 consecutive #1 New York Times bestsellers on President Trump, Fear, Rage, and Peril with Robert Costa, and an audiobook of 20 interviews with Trump. He has authored 23 best-selling books, 16 of which have been #1 New York Times bestsellers, covering every president from Nixon to Biden. Woodward is also an associate editor at The Washington Post, where he has worked for 53 years. He has shared in 2 Pulitzer Prizes, first in 1973 for the coverage of the Watergate scandal with Carl Bernstein, and second in 2002 as the lead reporter for coverage of the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Please join me in welcoming one of the greats, Bob Woodward.
Thank you. Thank you. As we were preparing in our indirect way to figure out how to do this weekend, part of the focus is to find and unearth great pieces of literature, which are really the bedrock of the word business that we are all in. And Robert Van Warren is one of the great writers of all time. His book, All the King's Men, 1947 Pulitzer Prize winner. Carl Bernstein and I were, when we were writing our first Watergate book, we thought, oh, that's a great title, All the King's Men. And then somebody at our publisher said, no, make it All the President's Men. And so we did that. Now, in the era of Trump, I think maybe we ought to go back to the original idea, all the king's men. But Robert Penn Warren wrote in a way that just grabs your brain and your soul. And I want to read something from his book, All the King's Men. We shall come back, no doubt, to walk down the row and watch young people on the tennis courts by the clump of mimosas, and walk down the beach by the bay where the diving floats lift gently in the sun, and on out to the pine grove where the needles thick on the ground will deaden the footfall, so that we shall move among the trees as soundlessly as smoke. But that will be a long time from now. And soon now we shall go out of the house and into the convulsion of the world, out of history and the awful responsibility of going back into history and the awful responsibility of time. In the work on reporting, particularly on politics, there are lots of behind-the-scenes moments that can be unearthed that really establish the reality that goes on that we do not see in the surface. I just want to recall one. This is during the Biden administration, and the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, laid out the consequences for Biden and the National Security Council, and in a sense, the whole country. He said to Shoigu, the Russian defense minister, "We know you are contemplating the use of tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine." He then laid out the consequences. And Shoigu, the Russian defense minister, said brazenly, "I don't take kindly to being threatened." Austin replied, "Mr. Minister, I am the leader of the most powerful military in the history of the world. I don't make threats." What's magnificent and powerful about that is he just did. I don't make threats. It is a journey of the lifetime, a lifetime to go back and try to figure out what really happened. In the last book I did, War, I reported that in March of 2023, that's just 2 years ago, General Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who #1 military man in the country at the time, what he said, now he's in that position, and he said of Donald Trump, he's a total fascist. He is the most dangerous person to this country, a fascist to the core. After retiring at the end of September 2023, Milley had to install bulletproof and blast-proof curtains in his home. Trump is still talking about recalling Milley as a retired general, which the commander-in-chief can do, recall Milley to active duty and court-martial him. The challenge in the media, or one of the many challenges, is to focus less on the daily Trump, the reality show that we see. He will do now an hour of television, and then television will spend the whole time trying to pick apart and figure out what he said and what it means. We have to somehow cover that, of course, but find a way to pull back and address the questions that the American family is facing, and find some way to focus on these kitchen table issues. Are people's struggles actually less? What issues are impacting them? In the first book I did on Trump fear, I reported on how Trump nearly crashed a thing we hold dear, the U.S. economy. And he literally, I have here the original, that he has nice penmanship, by the way, Trump, trade is bad. This is the original. I don't know whether to sell it or donate it to the Trump Library. But he means it. He thinks trade is bad. And if you pull that apart a little bit and try to put it in the context of our lives and what people in this country are going through, he's absolutely wrong. Trump could not be further from really explaining what's going on. Nearly all economists, left, right, center, agree that trade is good. Trade, according to the World Bank, has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty around the world. Imagine that. Lifting 1 billion people out of poverty around the world. Trade makes us safer, it strengthens international relations, it reduces the likelihood of conflict. International competition boosts domestic innovation and productivity. Trade expands markets for businesses, ensuring them so they can scale up and hire many more workers. It lowers prices for consumers. It provides access to a wider variety of goods and services, as well as better quality. So here is Trump saying it's bad, when in fact Trump is wrong. It is essential. It is one of the things that binds us together. Trump's first top economic advisor in his White House in 2017, Gary Cohn, who'd been the president of Goldman Sachs. And if you were to search the universe for the right person to be the top economic advisor to a Republican president, the former president of Goldman Sachs is the ideal candidate. Cohen would meet with Trump, and he'd say, "Where do you get this idea? Where do you get this idea that trade is bad?" Listing all the reasons why it is good. And he pressed Trump, and Trump said, in answer to that question, "Where do those views come from?" Trump, I just do. I had these views for 30 years. In interviews with Trump, pressed him exactly on that same question. Where does this come from? Is this the basis for your attempt to manage the economy? Yes, he says. where do you get this? Where do these ideas come from? I've had these views for 30 years. Just no question about it. So we are in a Trump world with all kinds of distorted ideas and values, and that is where we are living. And I don't know that we can find a language or a way to have a political discussion about what this means and the theories behind it. But it is absolutely at the center of what we are living, and in many ways will define where we're going. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob. Our final speaker is Lisa Genova, and if you've ever visited her website, it's very impressive. Best-selling author, neuroscientist, but my favorite title on the website is Empathy Warrior. And I would like to think that if you go to even half of our events this weekend, you might also achieve Empathy Warrior status. Acclaimed as the Oliver Sacks of fiction and the Michael Crichton of brain science, Lisa is the New York Times bestselling author of Still Alice, Left Neglected, Love Anthony, Inside the O'Briens, Remember the Science and Memory, and the Art of Forgetting, and now, More or Less Maddie. Still Alice was adapted into an Oscar-winning film starring Julianne Moore, Alec Baldwin, and Kristen Stewart. Lisa graduated valedictorian from Bates College with a degree in biopsychology and holds a PhD in neuroscience from Harvard University. She is featured in the documentary films To Not Fade Away and Have You Heard About Greg? Her TED Talks on Alzheimer's disease and memory have been viewed over 11 million times. Please join me in welcoming our empathy warrior, Lisa Genova.
Sorry about that. I'm so much shorter than everybody. Okay. Thank you for being here with me tonight. So, my grandmother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's when I was in my 20s. And as the neuroscientist in my family, I really felt it was my responsibility to learn everything I could about this disease so that we could understand what was happening to my grandmother, what would happen to her, and to take better care of her. So I read the scientific research papers. I read the clinical texts. So I learned about diagnosis, prognosis, treatment, management. I read books like The 36-Hour Day, self-help care books that were really helpful in best practices and how to be a good caregiver. I learned a lot. But as I spent time, I gotta move this again, I'm like reaching for it. Sorry, okay. But as I spent time with my grandmother, and as her Alzheimer's relentlessly advanced, I realized there was a sizable hole in my education. Shortly after she was diagnosed, she forgot who we all were. I should note here that being the typical Italian mother that she was, she did forget all of her daughters before she forgot any of her sons. Yeah, it's a true story. But soon she did forget all 9 of her kids. She forgot all of her grandchildren. She forgot her maiden name. She didn't recognize her house as her home or her face in the mirror. She thought her daughter Mary, who had become her full-time caregiver, was a homeless woman whom she'd kindly taken in. So she didn't recognize me. And as I sat on the living room couch with her, I would watch her talk to plastic baby dolls as if they were real babies. And at times she would try to breastfeed them. She would say, that she was ready to go home and she was already in her house. Or she would say, I'm waiting for my mother. She's going to be here any minute. And this was my great-grandmother who had died 30 years ago. So I would feel so bad for her and so heartbroken for her. And I would feel really scared and uncomfortable around her strange and unnerving symptoms of dementia, so much so that I would often just get up and go in another room. Because you see, while I felt so bad for her and so heartbroken for her, that's sympathy. I didn't know how to feel with her. And that's the distinction between sympathy and empathy, right? So sympathy is feeling for someone and keeps us emotionally detached. Our experience is separate, right? So there's you with Alzheimer's over there, and here's me over here safely different from you. Empathy collapses that emotional distance and allows us to feel real intimacy, connection, and shared experience. But I was a neuroscientist who had read comprehensively on the field of Alzheimer's. I thought I knew everything there was to know about this disease. But my education was not only incomplete, the most essential piece of knowledge was the piece that was missing for me. It turns out that everything that I read was written by an outsider looking in, and it was nonfiction. So everything I read was written by a scientist, a clinician, a caregiver, a social worker, or a psychologist. What I needed was a novel, or even a memoir. But fiction in particular really gives us the opportunity to walk in someone else's shoes, to experience what it feels like to be someone who might be very different than you. I needed a novel about a woman with Alzheimer's told from her perspective. But that novel didn't exist at the time. So somewhat boldly and definitely naively, this neuroscientist decided that I would write it. And that book became Still Alice. And to this day, that story helps millions of people understand what it feels like to live with Alzheimer's. And seeing what the power of what fiction can do, I continued. And so I write stories about people. I'm not at the bench anymore. I am not doing neuroscience. This is now my vocation, my mission. I write stories about people living with neurological diseases, disorders, conditions, mental illness, who tend to be feared, ignored, misunderstood, and excluded from belonging because of what's going on inside their brains. Stories give us access to feeling experiences that might otherwise be too scary, foreign, uncomfortable for us to even approach. And so now we don't just have intellectual knowledge. We don't just know something. We feel something, right? We've gained empathy and compassion, and that is transformative. It's a game changer. Empathy would have given me the ability to stay in the room with my grandmother. And so I could have maybe said to her when she said, I'm waiting for my mother, I could have said, okay, how about if we have a cup of tea together while we wait for her? All right, and then we would have been able to stay connected. And it's empathy that gives me the ability to stay in the room with people who have Alzheimer's out in the world. If you aren't yet familiar with Alzheimer's and you find out your neighbor has it, you might shy away, right? You might avoid conversation or not invite them to the cookout. You don't want to say the wrong thing. You don't want to feel uncomfortable. I get it. Like, we humans hate to feel uncomfortable. If something's going on with you and I don't understand what that is, if I'm not familiar with that, I'm going to get uncomfortable really quickly. And the quickest way for me to relieve that discomfort is to just look away. There, I feel better. But I've just unwittingly turned my back on, in this case, 55 million people worldwide. So, in my experience, fiction is the most powerful, efficient, and accessible path to empathy, especially stories about people we don't know or understand, living interior or exterior worlds unfamiliar or even unfathomable to us. I've written stories about people living with Alzheimer's, brain injury, autism, Huntington's, ALS, and bipolar disorder. And I do this because I've seen the magnificent, magical power of story to not only educate, so like the nonfiction books I read to begin with, so important, but beyond that, to also break down stigma, shame, alienation, fear, misinformation, judgment, and otherization. Wow, that's so powerful. Stories become a vehicle for conversation, for open conversation, and that leads to social change. That is no small thing. And while I've chosen to focus on the neurological, the subject matter here has no limits. Race, religion, gender, age, vocation, geography. Through story, we can gain empathy for anyone we don't know or understand yet. Yeah, so this is how, when we read widely, we have the chance to become more. An observation and a call to action for you all. Throughout my career as a writer, I would estimate that 80 to 90% of my book event audiences, and it's actually a little different here tonight, go Nantucket, 80 to 95% of my book audiences tend to be women. I think it's fair and accurate to say that the majority of fiction readers across all ages are women. And if fiction is the most powerful and even the primary place where we get to learn, experience, and practice empathy, then it is, by and large, women who have a much more developed sense of empathy and compassion for others. And I've asked a lot of men, actually, because I've noticed this for years, why don't you read fiction? And their answers tend to center around this answer. Well, if I have time to read, then I want to make sure that I'm learning something. So here's the call to action. Let's encourage everyone, include the men here, because men tend to be still the people who are in power, and we want them to have empathy and compassion. So if fiction is the most direct and powerful path to gaining empathy and compassion for others, which I believe it is, then reading diverse stories is essential to our humanity. Thank you.
Can I have another round of applause for our four speakers? Thank you so much. Thank you for your words. Okay, tomorrow we have another great lineup starting at 9 a.m. at the Methodist Church, starting with Bob Woodward and Linda Henry, and all through the day till 5. Tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. at the Dreamland, we have a conversation with Jason Reynolds and Carl Hyacin, and then also our presentation of our student awards. Thank you all for being here. On behalf of all of us at the Nantucket Book Foundation, thank you, good night, and happy reading.